A king's whispered command could decide the fate of an empire. Long before digital firewalls, the rulers of the ancient world faced the same urgent problem we grapple with today: how to keep a secret. This is the story of the ingenious and often beautiful systems they invented to protect the words that moved armies and forged alliances. You are about to discover the true sophistication of ancient statecraft, from physical cipher devices carried by Spartan runners to the mathematical codes of Roman emperors. By the end, you will understand not just how these systems worked, but why they were the hidden engines of history, safeguarding the plans that built and toppled civilizations. How did a simple leather strip become a general's most powerful weapon? And what royal decrees were considered so dangerous they had to be written in a language of their own invention? The security of an entire empire often rested on a single, clever idea. What do you think makes a secret truly powerful? That whisper of a king, that order to a general had to travel. It could not simply be hidden, it had to be transformed. This is the heart of ancient cryptography, a word that simply means secret writing, but we must be precise. A message whispered in a private room is a secret, but it is not cryptography. A message written in tiny letters and hidden inside a wax tablet is clever concealment, a practice called steganography, but again, it is not the true art of the cipher. True cryptography is something more active, more ingenious. It is the deliberate and systematic alteration of a message itself, according to a pre-arranged set of rules known only to the sender and the intended receiver. The original text, called the plain text, is scrambled into an unreadable form, the ciphertext. This transformation relies on two powerful ideas. The first is substitution, where you replace each letter with a different letter or symbol. The second is transposition, where you shuffle the order of the letters like rearranging tiles in a mosaic. And sometimes these ideas were built into physical objects, cipher devices, that turned the act of coding and decoding into a mechanical process. It was not about magic or mystery, it was about method. A shared method that turned a piece of papyrus or a strip of leather into a locked box for words. A box that could only be opened by someone holding the right key. This systematic approach is what separates a child's secret code from the statecraft of empires. So when we examine the systems that protected Spartan military orders or Roman diplomatic correspondence, we are not looking at simple tricks. We are looking at the earliest blueprints for information security, engineered for a world where a single intercepted message could mean the difference between victory and a civilization's end. Perhaps the most elegant demonstration of this principle was a simple rod of wood. The Spartan Scytale was not a complex machine, but its design was brilliantly effective. Imagine a cylinder, perhaps the thickness of a walking staff, carved with perfect uniformity. A long, narrow strip of leather was wound around this cylinder in a tight spiral, edge to edge. The message was then written lengthwise along the rod, one letter on each complete turn of the leather. The true cleverness was revealed when the leather was unwound. What remained was not a message, but a seemingly random string of letters. To anyone intercepting that strip, it was absolute gibberish. But for the intended recipient, a Spartan general in the field who possessed a cylinder of the exact same diameter, the process was reversed. By winding the leather snugly around his own Scytale, the letters would realign, popping back into their correct positions to form the original command. This was transposition in its purest physical form, a cipher where the key was not a word or a number, but a specific measurement. The security of the entire Spartan military communication system, therefore, relied on the secrecy of that diameter and the integrity of the officers who carried these rods. Its primary use was for concise, vital orders between kings and their commanders, the kind of information that decided battles. Speed was its advantage. a message could be encoded and decoded in moments by someone with the right tool. But its limitations were just as clear. The system provided no secrecy if the Scytale itself was captured. Once an enemy held the rod, every past and future message sent with that diameter was compromised. It also offered no protection against someone who might deduce the method through repeated interception, perhaps noticing that the letters appeared at regular intervals corresponding to the width of the leather strip. The Scytale was a powerful tool for its time, a tangible lock for words, but it was a lock with only one key. Its legacy, however, is profound. It represents the moment cryptography stepped out of the realm of pure abstraction and became something you could hold in your hand, a physical embodiment of the ancient quest for secure communication. While the Spartans locked words onto a rod of wood, another civilization was experimenting with a more abstract key. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, faced a communication challenge of staggering scale, needing to coordinate legions and govern provinces across thousands of miles. For truly sensitive dispatches, especially in times of war, a simple sealed letter was not enough. Enter the method attributed to one of Rome's most famous figures, Julius Caesar. His cipher was deceptively simple, a pure exercise in substitution. Imagine the alphabet written in a circle. To encode a message, you would shift every letter a fixed number of positions forward. Caesar himself favored a shift of 3 places, so the letter A would become D, B would become E, and so on, wrapping around so that X would become A, Y would become B, and Z would become C. The word veni would transform into the nonsensical ikul. This was the key, the secret number 3, shared only with his trusted generals and confidants. Historical accounts, like those from the biographer Suetonius, tell us Caesar used this very system for his private correspondence, most critically during the Gallic Wars. A written order to move a legion or to initiate a siege, if intercepted by Gallic scouts, would appear as a meaningless jumble of letters. To a Roman commander who knew the rule, however, it was a simple mental exercise to slide each letter back 3 places and reveal the command. This provided a basic but effective layer of security against casual interception or prying eyes within his own camp. The system's genius was in its elegance and speed. It required no special tools, just knowledge of the shift. But this simplicity was also its fatal flaw, a weakness that would not be formally understood for centuries but existed from the very beginning. The cipher does not disguise the fundamental patterns of language. In any given language, certain letters appear more frequently than others. In English, for example, the letter E is the most common. In Latin, the vowel A and the consonant S were highly frequent. A codebreaker who intercepted enough of Caesar's ciphertext could begin counting the symbols. If one symbol appeared far more often than any other, it was statistically likely to represent the most common letter. Once they cracked that single connection, the entire shift pattern would unravel, and every message using that key would be laid bare. This technique is called frequency analysis, and while the Romans of Caesar's era did not document it as a formal science, the vulnerability was always there, waiting for a sufficiently motivated and observant adversary to discover. The Caesar cipher, therefore, stands as a monumental step in the story of cryptography. It moved the secret from a physical object like the Scytale to a purely intellectual concept, a shared piece of knowledge. It demonstrated that security could be baked into the message itself through a mathematical rule. Yet it also revealed a fundamental truth about secret keeping, that human language, with all its rhythms and patterns, is the codebreaker's greatest ally. Any system that does not account for those inherent patterns is in time destined to be broken. Caesar's cipher revealed a critical vulnerability, the telltale heartbeat of language itself. Yet this very pattern, the predictable frequency of letters, would inspire a different kind of code, one designed not just to hide a message, but to imbue it with a layer of sacred meaning. Far from the battlefields of Rome, within the ancient Hebrew tradition, we find the Atbash cipher. This system operates on a beautifully simple and symmetrical rule. You write out the Hebrew alphabet. The first letter, Aleph, is replaced with the last letter, Tav. The second letter, Bet, is replaced with the second to last, Shin. The name Atbash itself comes from this pairing, Aleph, Tav, Bet, Shin. It is a perfect mirror, a monoalphabetic substitution where the entire alphabet is flipped. Its most famous documented use is not in a military dispatch but within a sacred text. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet delivers a message concerning a great and threatening power, Babylon. But in two specific passages, the text does not use the word Babylon. Instead, it uses the cryptic term Sheshach. For centuries, this was a puzzle. Scholars eventually realized that if you apply the Atbash cipher to the Hebrew word for Babylon, Babel, it transforms directly into Sheshach. This was not cryptography for operational security in the way a Spartan general needed. This was something more nuanced, a form of prophetic or symbolic concealment. The purpose may have been to veil a harsh judgment against a powerful empire from casual readers or hostile censors, or perhaps to encode the name within a literary structure that held deeper theological significance for those initiated into the method. This shifts our understanding of ancient cryptography's role. Here, the cipher is not merely a tool to protect a tactical secret, it is a vehicle for layered meaning. It suggests that the act of encoding could carry symbolic weight, separating open knowledge from concealed wisdom. The security it provided was not against battlefield interception, but against superficial understanding. It protected the sanctity or the potency of a pronouncement within a cultural and religious context. The Atbash cipher demonstrates that the drive to encipher, to transform plain speech into something requiring a key, was woven into the very fabric of historical record-keeping and sacred storytelling. It was an early signal that cryptography could serve the mind and the spirit just as much as it served the state. But what if the greatest danger was not in the message being read, but in it being discovered at all? For the diplomats and spies of the ancient Greek world, the very existence of a secret communication could be a death sentence or a cause for war. This called for a different kind of art, not the scrambling of letters, but their complete disappearance. The Greeks perfected the craft of steganography, the science of concealing a message presence entirely. One of the earliest and most clever manuals on this subject comes from a 4th century BCE writer and military strategist named Aeneas Tacticus. In his surviving works, he details a method of breathtaking simplicity and effectiveness, designed for an era of wooden writing tablets. These tablets were common, a flat piece of wood with a shallow recess carved into its center. This recess would be filled with wax, providing a smooth, reusable surface for writing with a stylus. Aeneas described a process that turned this everyday object into a perfect vessel for deception. First, the sender would carefully scrape away the wax from the tablet's recess, exposing the bare wood beneath. On that wooden surface, they would inscribe their true, secret message. Then they would pour fresh, melted wax back into the recess, covering the hidden writing completely. Finally, on this new, blank wax surface, they would write an entirely different, completely innocuous cover message. The tablet now carried two texts. One, visible to all, might be a mundane business contract, a personal letter, or a trivial poem. The other, invisible beneath, could contain the terms of a secret alliance, the warning of an impending betrayal, or the coordinates for a clandestine meeting. The brilliance of this system was its layered security. Even if a suspicious official or enemy agent intercepted the courier, a routine inspection would reveal nothing out of the ordinary. The wax showed no obvious tampering. Only someone who knew the secret, the intended recipient, would be instructed to gently heat the tablet. The wax would soften and could be lifted away, revealing the true message etched into the wood below. This was not just a trick, it was a standard tool of statecraft for the rival Greek city-states, constantly engaged in delicate diplomacy and shadowy intrigue. The Aeneas Tacticus tablet represents a fundamental fork in the road of secrecy. Cryptography accepts that a message might be found, but aims to make it unreadable. Steganography operates on a more paranoid and sometimes more practical principle that the best secret is one nobody even thinks to look for. It is the art of hiding in plain sight, of making the vital appear trivial. In the hands of a Greek diplomat, a simple slab of waxed wood became a silent courier, carrying a whisper of state beneath a shout of ordinary life. Julius Caesar's method, for all its fame, was a personal tool. But when power passed to his adopted heir, Augustus, the cipher itself was inherited and subtly transformed. Augustus understood that the security of the empire now rested on a system of controlled communication flowing directly from his person. He adopted a shift cipher much like his predecessors, but with a telling adjustment. Where Caesar shifted 3 letters forward, Augustus often used a simple shift of just 1. In his system, A became B, B became C, and so on through the alphabet. This was an even simpler key for his trusted circle to remember and apply. But Augustus went a step further on occasion, employing a different kind of substitution where letters were replaced not with other letters but with numerical symbols. This is a fascinating detail preserved by the historian Suetonius, who notes that Augustus would sometimes write B for A, C for B, and so forth. This shift from a personal code to an imperial standard is a quiet revolution in the story of secrecy. It marks the institutionalization of cryptography. The cipher was no longer just Julius Caesar's clever trick for the Gallic Wars. It was becoming a formalized component of the Roman state's administrative and military machinery. When Augustus sent orders to a provincial governor or instructions to a legionary commander, the very form of the message, its scrambled letters, signaled its authority and its confidentiality. It created an inner circle defined not just by loyalty but by shared knowledge. The use of a consistent, if simple, system across the vast imperial network meant that secure protocols could be taught and expected. This represents a move from ad hoc secrecy to systematic information security policy. The emperor's word was law, and now the method of conveying that word was also standardized to protect it. The evolution from Caesar's shift of 3 to Augustus' shift of 1 is less about improving cryptographic strength, both were vulnerable to the same frequency analysis, and more about cementing a practice into the foundation of governance. It shows a ruling power consciously building a layer of secrecy into its very lines of communication, understanding that the integrity of command depended on controlling who could read the words. Augustus, the first true Roman emperor, was also, in a very real sense, the first to make cryptography an official instrument of state. While Roman emperors standardized ciphers for statecraft, a very different text from ancient India reveals that the study of secrecy was considered an essential life skill. In Vatsyayana's Kamasutra, a work often narrowly defined in the modern mind, the author lists 64 arts a cultivated person should learn. Among music, painting, and architecture, you find a fascinating entry, the art of secret writing known as mlecchita-vikalpa. This is not a passing reference, but a formal inclusion of cryptography within a classical curriculum for living a full and sophisticated life. The text outlines several methods, including simple substitution ciphers where letters are swapped according to a rule, and the use of coded words or synonyms known only to a private circle. A lover might send a message where the word for moon secretly meant meeting, or a merchant could disguise a price within an innocent poem. This frames secrecy not just as a tool for spies and generals, but as a facet of personal diplomacy, private intimacy, and commercial discretion. The Kamasutra's inclusion of mlecchita-vikalpa is profound evidence. It tells us that in ancient India, the principles of concealing meaning were analyzed, categorized, and taught as part of a formal body of knowledge, parallel to developments in Greece and Rome, but arising from its own rich intellectual tradition. Here, cryptography escapes the battlefield and enters the salon and the marketplace, applied to the delicate negotiations of personal life and the confidential dealings of business. It was an art for protecting one's private world, demonstrating that the human desire to control information, to create layers of meaning accessible only to a chosen few, was universal. This formalized study underscores a crucial point. The drive to encode was not merely a practical response to threat, but an intellectual pursuit, a recognized branch of learning that acknowledged how vital secrets are to the full spectrum of human experience, from affairs of the heart to affairs of state. But the desire to conceal meaning reaches back even further, to the very cradle of civilization itself. In the dusty archives of Mesopotamia, among the countless cuneiform tablets that record everything from grain receipts to epic poetry, archaeologists have found puzzling texts that suggest an ancient, and perhaps the very first, flirtation with cryptographic thinking. These are not formal ciphers as we understand them, but clever manipulations of the world's oldest writing system. Cuneiform was a complex script, using wedge-shaped marks to represent both whole words called logograms and phonetic syllables. A master scribe had a deep toolbox of symbols to choose from for any given word or sound. Some tablets, particularly those dealing with highly guarded temple rituals, medical preparations, or potentially sensitive diplomatic agreements, show a curious pattern. The scribes appear to have deliberately chosen the rarest, most obscure logograms to write key terms. Instead of using the common, well-known symbol for a sacred object or a potent ingredient, they would select an archaic or invented sign that would be meaningless to anyone outside a specific, initiated circle of priests or scholars. In other cases, they might assign an unusual, non-standard syllabic value to a common sign, or pepper the text with loanwords from a foreign language like Hurrian or Elamite. The effect was to create a layer of professional obscurity, a medical recipe for a powerful remedy, or the precise incantation for a state ritual, would be technically written down for preservation, yet rendered practically unreadable to the average scribe or any outsider who might gain access to the tablet. This presents a fascinating challenge for modern researchers. How do we distinguish an intentional act of early cryptography from simple scholarly pedantry, an obscure literary style, or even just a scribble error? When we see a strange symbol on a 4,000-year-old tablet, are we looking at a secret code or merely a mistake made by a tired apprentice? The line is incredibly fine. The intent, however, seems clear in certain contexts. These practices protected specialized knowledge, maintaining the power and prestige of elite institutions like the temple or the palace by controlling access to information. It was a cryptography of exclusion, using the complexity of the writing system itself as the lock. The Mesopotamian scribes may not have had a word for cipher, but their actions reveal a profound understanding of a principle that would echo through the ages, that writing is not just for communication, it is also a tool for concealment, allowing the powerful to whisper across the centuries, their most important secrets hiding in plain sight among a forest of cryptic wedges. This drive to protect sacred words reached its most artistic expression along the banks of the Nile. Within the silent depths of royal tombs and upon the towering walls of temples, Egyptian scribes and priests engaged in a practice that blurred the line between writing, art, and magic. They developed a form of cryptographic hieroglyphs, not to send a secret message across distance, but to permanently encode power and identity for eternity. This was secrecy carved in stone, designed to safeguard the most potent names and concepts from misuse or from those deemed unworthy. The system relied on the unique nature of hieroglyphs themselves, which could function in three ways: as a direct picture of an object, as a symbol for a related idea, or as a sign for a sound. It was this flexibility that allowed for profound manipulation. To protect the name of a god or a pharaoh, a scribe might deliberately choose obscure or complex phonetic signs to spell it out, creating a puzzle that only the educated priesthood could fully decipher. In other cases, they used a method called cryptographic substitution, where a potentially dangerous symbol was replaced by a safer one. A classic example involves the serpent hieroglyph. The cobra was a powerful emblem of royalty and divine protection, but it could also represent chaos or a dangerous force. In certain ritual texts meant to contain or pacify such forces, the scribes would avoid drawing the actual snake. Instead, they might use the hieroglyph for a leg because the words for leg and snake in Egyptian shared some consonant sounds. So, by writing the word for leg, they were phonetically hinting at the snake without invoking its full, potentially hazardous image. This was a form of magical security, believing that writing the true name or form of a powerful entity could accidentally unleash its influence. The most profound applications are found in places like the tomb of Rameses IX in the Valley of the Kings. Here, the walls are covered with the Amduat, a detailed guide to the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. This journey was fraught with perilous beings and secret gates. The text and illustrations were not merely a description, they were a functional map and a set of spells to aid the pharaoh's own soul on its voyage. To ensure these spells worked only for the intended royal individual and to guard their potency, the scribes employed layers of cryptographic writing. Divine names were scrambled, dangerous underworld entities were depicted with altered or composite animal features, and the phonetic values of signs were switched. The result is a sacred text that operates on multiple levels, a beautiful public mural for all eternity that simultaneously conceals its deepest operational secrets within a code known only to the theological elite. This Egyptian practice reveals a purpose for cryptography far removed from wartime dispatches. It was an act of eternal safeguarding, a belief that the written word held tangible power that needed to be both displayed and controlled. The tomb walls whisper a paradox. They shout the glory of the gods and the pharaoh for all to see, yet they whisper their true, hidden names only to those who knew how to listen through the stone. A grid of 5 by 5 squares would become one of history's most versatile tools for secrecy. The Greek historian Polybius, living in the 2nd century before the Common Era, faced a practical military problem: how to send complex messages over long visual distances, like from one hilltop to another. His ingenious solution was not initially a cipher but a signaling system. He arranged the Greek alphabet, which had 24 letters at the time, into a 5 by 5 grid. Since 25 spaces existed, he placed 2 letters, iota and kappa, into the same final cell to make it fit. Each letter now had a unique 2-part address, a coordinate pair representing its row and its column. To signal the letter alpha, which sat in the first row and first column, a signalman would hold up one torch on the left to indicate row 1 and one torch on the right to indicate column 1. For beta, row 1, column 2, it would be one torch and then 2. This allowed any word or command to be transmitted silently across valleys using nothing but simple flashes of light, a revolutionary form of optical telegraphy. The true cryptographic genius of the Polybius Square, however, emerged centuries later when others realized this coordinate system could be repurposed. Instead of signaling torches, the 2 numbers became a code. You could write a message by converting each letter into its 2-digit coordinate. The word hello would become a string of numbers like 23, 15, 31, 31, 34. This transformed the text into something that looked entirely numerical, completely obscuring the letter frequencies that doomed simpler ciphers like Caesar's. A codebreaker analyzing this ciphertext would not see a suspicious abundance of the letter E. They would see a jumble of digits from 1 to 5. This was a monumental conceptual leap. It moved encryption from monoalphabetic substitution, where one letter always equals another, into the realm of coordinate-based encryption, where a single character is broken into two components. It abstracted the message one step further from its original form. The Polybius Square became a foundational building block for more complex systems for centuries to come. Its simple grid provided a method to fractionate information, a principle that would underpin increasingly sophisticated ciphers, proving that sometimes the most powerful ideas in secrecy begin not with a desire to hide, but with a simple need to be seen from a mile away. A cipher could lock the words, but the message itself still had to travel. This was the fundamental vulnerability no code could solve on its own. The most brilliant cryptographic system ever devised would be rendered worthless if the papyrus scroll or leather pouch never reached its destination, or if it was delivered by the wrong hand. Ancient states understood this intimately, and so they built a parallel system of security, one that relied not on mathematics, but on human loyalty and physical integrity. This was the world of the trusted courier. In Sparta, the famed cryptea agents, young men trained in stealth and endurance, were likely candidates to carry the Scytale encoded leather strips across treacherous terrain. In the vast Roman Empire, the cursus publicus, the official relay postal service, employed state-approved messengers who traveled with military escorts along protected roads. These individuals were more than just delivery men. They were extensions of the state's authority, personally vetted and often holding a form of sacred trust. Their lives were pledged to the security of the message, and their failure could mean severe punishment. The system recognized a simple truth, that the chain of secrecy is only as strong as its most human link. Yet, even a trusted courier could be overpowered or bribed. To guard against this, a second physical layer of security was employed, one that has left its mark in the archaeological record, quite literally. Before a sealed document was handed to the runner, the sender would take one final step. They would roll the papyrus or fold the wax tablet, tie it with cord, and then press a lump of soft clay or wax over the knot. Into this moist clay, they would impress the design from their personal signet ring. This created a unique, hard seal. The purpose was twofold: authentication and tamper detection. The intricate, personalized design, a family crest, a portrait, a symbol of office, proved the document originated from the claimed authority. It was a signature in clay. More importantly, that seal was fragile. Any attempt to untie the cord, unroll the scroll to read the contents, and then reseal it would almost certainly crack or damage the unique impression. A recipient, upon seeing an intact, matching seal, could be reasonably confident the message had not been read en route. The seal did not keep the message secret from the courier, but it made any attempt at interception blatantly obvious. It turned stealth into a messy, detectable act. This practice was universal, from the cylinder seals of Mesopotamia rolled across clay tablets to the signet rings of Egyptian pharaohs and Roman consuls. The cipher protected the meaning of the words, the seal protected the sanctity of the container. Together, they formed a complete security protocol, addressing both the intellectual and the physical threats to a state secret. It was a recognition that true security is always a layered defense, where trust in people, clever mechanics, and abstract codes must work in concert. The fate of an empire could hinge on the unbroken clay stamped by a ring, and the unwavering resolve of the person who carried it into the unknown. Yet for all their clever devices and shared rules, a single, profound weakness haunted every ancient cipher. It was the problem of the key itself. In a world of symmetric cryptography, where the same secret knowledge is used to both lock and unlock the message, how do you safely deliver that key across a hostile landscape? Imagine a Spartan king, alone in his chamber, winding a leather strip around his Scytale and writing the command to attack at dawn. His general waits in a distant mountain pass. The king now possesses two critical items, the encoded leather strip and the knowledge of the rod's exact diameter. The message is useless without that measurement. Sending both together with the same runner would be catastrophic, like mailing a locked safe and its combination in the same envelope. If the runner is captured, the enemy gains everything, the ciphertext and the key to read it. This is the ancient and eternal dilemma of key distribution. How do you whisper a secret into someone's ear when they are 100 miles away, surrounded by enemies who are listening for every sound? The solutions ancient states devised were human, practical, and fraught with risk. The first and most basic was memorization. Before a general left for the frontier, he would be summoned for a private audience. The shift number for a Caesar cipher, or the agreed-upon symbol substitutions for a diplomatic code, would be communicated verbally, face-to-face, with no written record. The key lived only in the minds of the sender and receiver. This method relied on absolute trust and perfect recall, but it was fragile. A commander could forget the complex rule under stress. More gravely, if that general was captured or turned traitor, the entire cryptographic system for that theater of war was compromised, and there was no way to change the key without sending another vulnerable messenger. The second solution was the dedicated key courier. A separate, highly trusted agent, perhaps a family member, a lifelong bodyguard, or a priest bound by sacred oath, would be dispatched ahead of time or along a different route. Their sole mission was to deliver the key, the verbal instruction, or perhaps a small, innocuous-looking object that held the secret, like a bead on a string representing a shift number. This created a separation between the message and its means of decryption, but it doubled the exposure. Now, two individuals were traveling with pieces of the puzzle, and the state had to place its faith in the loyalty and stealth of two people instead of one. The third and most elegant solution was to build the key into a physical object, as the Spartans did. The Scytale rod itself was the key. Its security relied on the general already possessing an identical rod before he ever left home. The key was not information to be communicated. It was a tool to be manufactured in duplicate under tight control. This solved the distribution problem in advance, but it created a new vulnerability, permanence. If the enemy ever captured one of those rods, every message ever sent using that diameter was instantly readable, and the entire network had to be re-equipped with new rods, a logistical nightmare in the ancient world. Each of these methods, memorization, couriers, or pre-shared devices, reveals a stark truth. Before the first encrypted character was ever written, the most dangerous part of the operation had already taken place, the fragile, human act of sharing a secret in a world without secure line. The entire edifice of ancient state secrecy was built upon this precarious foundation, a testament to the fact that the strongest cipher in the world is only as secure as the journey of its key. The clay seal could be checked, the trusted courier questioned, but the ciphertext itself presented a silent challenge to any rival who held it. Did the creators of these ancient codes understand that their scrambled messages could, in time, be unscrambled by a determined adversary? The evidence suggests they were acutely aware of this intellectual arms race, even if they lacked a formal science to describe it. Consider the logical pressure of a simple substitution cipher in a world of educated prisoners and courtly intrigue. A captured Roman diplomatic scroll, written in Caesar's shift, would land in the hands of a Greek or Persian scholar. This scholar would see a text in Latin letters, but the words made no sense. His first clue would be the very structure of the document, the spacing, the presence of common short words, the flow of a formal proclamation. He might begin by guessing that a frequent, solitary symbol represented the letter A or E. Through trial, error, and a deep familiarity with Latin style, the pattern would slowly emerge. There are no surviving manuals from this era titled "How to Break Ciphers," but the practice undoubtedly occurred wherever power was at stake. It was an exercise in logic and linguistic intuition, a puzzle for spies and scholars alike. The Greeks, in particular, with their passion for rhetoric and analysis, laid the philosophical groundwork. Scholars like Aristotle wrote extensively on patterns in language, on the rhythms and structures that make communication effective. While they may not have written a paper on letter frequency statistics, the concept was within their grasp. An educated Greek observing a long ciphertext would naturally notice that certain symbols appeared again and again. He would understand that language is not random, that it has a fingerprint. This nascent understanding created a perpetual duel. The cipher maker's goal was to disguise that fingerprint, to flatten out those telltale rhythms. The cipher breaker's goal was to find the tiny irregularities, the cracks in the artificial pattern, and widen them until the whole system collapsed. This was cryptanalysis in its earliest, most intuitive form. It was not yet a field of study, but a dark art practiced in the shadows of palaces and military camps. Every time a code was used, it was a gamble, a bet that the enemy's patience or cleverness would run out before the message's usefulness expired. The very existence of increasingly complex methods, moving from the Scytale to the Polybius Square, shows an evolving response to this threat. Each new system was, in part, a reaction to the perceived weaknesses of the last, a silent admission that yesterday's unbreakable code was tomorrow's open book. This endless dance between hiding and finding, between creating complexity and unraveling it, is the true heartbeat of the story. It reveals that ancient states did not operate in a vacuum of assumed secrecy. They lived with a constant, quiet fear that their most guarded words were being listened to by minds as sharp as their own. The silence left by a vanished civilization can be as telling as its loudest monument. For all we know of Spartan rods and Roman shifts, there exists a profound and frustrating gap in the story, a missing chapter written by a people who understood secrecy as a matter of survival. The Empire of Carthage stood for centuries as Rome's greatest rival, a maritime and commercial power of immense sophistication. Its leaders coordinated vast trade networks across the Mediterranean and commanded formidable armies led by legendary generals like Hannibal. The logistical feat of marching war elephants over the Alps was not an act of improvisation. It required precise, long-range communication that could not be intercepted by Roman scouts. It is a near certainty that the Carthaginian state employed advanced cryptographic systems. Yet today, we possess not a single example of a Carthaginian cipher. Not one scrap of encoded papyrus, no description of a cipher device in any surviving text. This absence is not an accident of time. It is the result of a deliberate and final act of erasure. When Roman legions finally broke through the walls of Carthage in the year 146 before the Common Era, the orders from the Senate were absolute and brutal. The city was to be utterly destroyed. For days the fires burned. Libraries, temples, and state archives containing centuries of records were reduced to ash and scattered dust. The Romans were not merely defeating an enemy, they were annihilating its memory, ensuring no Carthaginian manual of statecraft, no ledger of diplomatic codes would ever be studied again. This systematic destruction was so complete that modern historians must piece together an understanding of Carthage from archaeological fragments and the often biased accounts written by its Roman conquerors. The loss of their cryptographic methods is a direct casualty of this historical silencing, so we are left to reason from logic and context. What might their systems have looked like? As a Phoenician colony, Carthage inherited a legacy of commerce and long-distance seafaring. Phoenician merchants needed ways to protect sensitive price lists and trade route information. It is plausible that early Carthaginian cryptography grew from this mercantile need, using simple substitution ciphers based on the Phoenician alphabet, one of the oldest in the world. Later, through intense contact and conflict with the Greek city-states of Sicily, Carthaginian generals would have encountered ideas like the Scytale or the steganographic methods of Aeneas Tacticus. Their own systems likely evolved into a hybrid practice, blending Phoenician script with Greek mechanical ingenuity. The most tantalizing possibilities surround their most famous son, Hannibal. During his 15-year campaign in Italy, he maintained cohesion among a multi-ethnic army and coordinated with allies across hostile territory. His messengers, slipping through Roman lines, would have carried more than just oral reports. They would have borne encrypted instructions for troop movements, supply points, and clandestine meetings. Perhaps they used a complex version of the Polybius Square, adapted to their own alphabet. Or maybe they employed a cipher disk, two rotating tablets of bronze or wood with different alphabets inscribed around the edges, allowing for a variable shift key that could be changed regularly, a technology hinted at in later periods. We will never know for certain. The story of Carthaginian cryptography is therefore a ghost story, a narrative defined by its emptiness. It forces us to confront a hard truth about our understanding of the ancient world, that what survives is only a fraction of what once existed. The brilliant minds who devised ways to whisper across the Mediterranean left no trace of their most guarded conversations, their secrets dying with them in the smoke over a ruined city. This fragmentary record reminds us that for every cipher we can study, there are countless others, lost to fire, time, and conquest, whose sophistication we can only dimly appreciate. Sun Tzu's treatise on strategy contains a principle more valuable than any single cipher. In The Art of War, written in the 5th century before the Common Era, the master strategist does not describe a specific code or device. Instead, he articulates the profound philosophy that makes such tools necessary. All warfare is based on deception, he declares. This simple statement is the strategic bedrock for every act of secret communication that would follow in Chinese statecraft. For Sun Tzu, victory was not merely about having stronger forces, but about controlling information, about shaping what the enemy believes to be true. He instructs commanders to appear weak when they are strong, to seem far away when they are near, to feign disorder while maintaining perfect discipline. This entire theater of illusion depends on one critical condition: that your own plans, your true intentions and capabilities, remain completely hidden. The enemy must see only the performance you choose to stage. This creates a relentless demand for what we now call operational security. Every movement of troops, every calculation of supply, every message between a general and his sovereign becomes a potential leak, a clue that could shatter the illusion and reveal your hand. Sun Tzu's philosophy provided the ultimate rationale for developing technical means of secrecy. If deception is the art, then cryptography becomes an essential backstage tool. It is the mechanism that allows the general to coordinate the complex machinery of his real plans, while the enemy watches a carefully crafted mirage. Imagine a Chinese general preparing a surprise attack on a fortified pass. He must receive authorization from the imperial court, coordinate with supply officers, and send precise timing to allied commanders. If any of these messages sent across hundreds of miles were intercepted and read by the enemy, the entire stratagem would collapse. The feint would become a fatal trap for his own army. Therefore, the need to encode those messages was not an optional extra. It was a direct, practical requirement of following Sun Tzu's core teaching. This philosophical emphasis elevated secret communication from a useful trick to a pillar of statecraft. It created a culture within the Chinese military and bureaucratic elite that valued opacity and prized methods to achieve it. While Sun Tzu himself may not have detailed the wax tablets or shift ciphers, his work established the intellectual environment where such innovations were not just tolerated, but actively encouraged and refined. His ideas justified the investment in creating secure channels, in training trusted messengers, and in developing ever more sophisticated ways to render words invisible to unwanted eyes. The cipher, in this light, is more than a lock for a message. It is the physical embodiment of a strategic principle. It is the tool that allows the commander to be, as Sun Tzu advised, formless like water, adapting his true shape in perfect secrecy while his enemy stares at a reflection they mistake for reality. This philosophical foundation would eventually support incredibly advanced cryptographic systems, but it all began with the understanding that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the secret kept perfectly and the illusion maintained flawlessly. The Roman legions were a machine of conquest, and like any complex machine, they required a precise and secure system of communication to function. While Caesar's personal cipher captured the historical imagination, the true cryptographic genius of Rome was not in a single emperor's trick, but in the vast, standardized, and often invisible systems woven into the military's daily life. This was cryptography on an industrial scale, designed not just for the emperor's scrolls, but for the centurion's field report and the quartermaster's supply list. It operated at three distinct levels: the written word, the battlefield signal, and the spoken command, each creating a layer of secrecy through shared knowledge and routine. For written dispatches and administrative records, speed and consistency were paramount. This led to the widespread use of Tyrrhenian notes, an elaborate system of shorthand invented by Marcus Tullius Tiro, Cicero's secretary. While not a cipher in the traditional sense, this was a form of linguistic encoding with profound security benefits. Tyrrhenian notes used thousands of unique symbols to represent whole words, common phrases, and grammatical endings. A trained scribe could transcribe speech almost in real time. For the military, this meant logistical orders, personnel reports, and tactical summaries could be written with incredible speed and compactness. But to an outsider, even another Roman who was literate in standard Latin, a tablet covered in Tyrrhenian notes was utterly indecipherable. It was a professional code, restricting access to information to a class of educated military clerks. A captured supply requisition written in this shorthand would reveal nothing to a Germanic chieftain. It was a secure medium by virtue of its specialized complexity. This system turned routine paperwork into a first line of cryptographic defense, protecting the mundane yet vital details of food, armor, and troop strength that kept the legions moving. On the chaotic field of battle, where shouts were lost in the din of combat, visual and auditory signals formed a second, immediate cryptographic layer. These were pre-arranged codes, simple but vital. The signifer, the standard bearer, did not just carry a symbol of the unit's pride. His banner was a command console. Specific movements, dips, or waves of the standard conveyed orders to advance, wheel, or retreat. The blast patterns from the cornicen's horn, the soldier tasked with blowing the large circular instrument, formed an auditory code. A series of short blasts might mean form ranks, while a long, sustained note could signal the call to charge. To the enemy, these were just noise and motion, part of the confusing tapestry of war. But to a legionary drilled for years, they were as clear as a shouted command. This was real-time cryptography without writing, a shared symbolic language that allowed a general to direct thousands of men as a single entity amidst the chaos. The security lay in the training. The enemy might see the standard move, but without the years of drill to internalize its meaning, the signal was just a piece of cloth waving in the wind. Finally, the Roman military developed its own coded lexicon, a spoken jargon that obscured meaning from outsiders. Military slang and official terminology created a linguistic barrier. A civilian might hear a soldier talk about checking the pilum or forming the testudo, but the specific actions, vulnerabilities, and techniques implied by those terms remained opaque. More deliberately, units might use agreed-upon code words for specific operations. The word for a routine patrol might secretly mean to scout for an ambush site, or a term for gathering firewood could actually signal preparations to break camp under cover of darkness. This verbal coding required no special tools, just the pre-briefing of officers and the trust that they would convey the true meaning to their men at the right moment. It was a flexible, deniable layer of secrecy, perfect for the fluid and unpredictable circumstances of campaign life. Together, these three systems, shorthand, signals, and jargon, formed the resilient nervous system of the Roman war machine. They demonstrate that the most effective cryptography is often not about unbreakable codes, but about integrated systems that filter information, ensuring the right message reaches the right ears at the right time, while leaving adversaries listening to a language they cannot comprehend. Yet even the sprawling, standardized systems of Rome would one day give way to a new center of power and secrecy. The flame of ancient cryptography did not die with the legions, it was carried eastward, preserved and refined within the gilded walls of a city that called itself the New Rome. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, became the guardian of classical knowledge, and within its scholarly circles, the art of secret writing evolved from a tool of war into an instrument of high diplomacy. Here, in the 9th century, we meet a figure whose very name signals a leap in sophistication: Leo the mathematician. A philosopher, scientist, and teacher to emperors, Leo did not just use ciphers. He appears to have designed one for the imperial court that represented a deliberate advance in the craft. His system moved decisively beyond the simple, fixed shifts of the Roman era. Instead, it employed a full cipher alphabet, a complete and scrambled substitution key. Imagine two lists: on the left, the standard Greek alphabet in its proper order; on the right, a jumbled version of that same alphabet, where each letter had a unique, pre-assigned partner. Alpha might correspond to Xi, Beta to Psi, Gamma to Omega, and so on through all 24 letters. This was no longer a Caesar cipher with its predictable, mechanical slide. This was a bespoke code where the relationship between the plaintext and ciphertext letters was arbitrary and could be changed by creating a new key. The security implications were significant. Frequency analysis, the great weakness of monoalphabetic ciphers, was still a threat, as the letter E in the plaintext would always become, say, theta in the ciphertext, creating a detectable pattern. But the system was far less transparent than a simple shift. An enemy codebreaker could not simply try shifting the alphabet one position, then two, then three, until the message made sense. They would have to test thousands upon thousands of possible letter pairings, a task of daunting complexity without systematic methods or significant computational power, which simply did not exist in the 9th century. This cipher was not for the battlefield but for the silk-draped chambers of diplomacy. Its primary use was in the empire's delicate correspondence with neighboring powers, with rival caliphates, and with restless barbarian kingdoms on its frontiers. A Byzantine ambassador arriving at a foreign court would carry letters sealed with the emperor's mark and written in this official cipher. The very form of the document, its strange and unreadable script, was a statement. It communicated the authority, the bureaucratic rigor, and the learned secrecy of the Byzantine state. It said that the words it contained were not for every eye, only for the intended recipient who possessed the official deciphering key, likely another trusted official or a vetted translator within the foreign court. This represents a crucial institutionalization. Cryptography was no longer just an emperor's personal tool or a general's field expedient. It was a formalized component of the state chancery, a standard operating procedure for managing the empire's external relations. Leo's cipher, attributed to a mathematician, symbolizes this shift from practical secrecy to scholarly secrecy. It was a product of an empire that saw itself as the heir to Greek logic and Roman order, applying methodical intelligence to the perpetual problem of trust in a dangerous world. The locked words traveling from Constantinople were more than just messages. They were artifacts of a civilization that understood information itself as a pillar of power, to be shaped, controlled, and protected with the full weight of its intellectual tradition. But a system like Leo's, for all its complexity, still held a secret that could be unraveled. The very patterns of human speech, the rhythms that give language its music, also whisper its secrets to anyone who knows how to listen. In the bustling intellectual heart of the 9th century Abbasid Caliphate, a scholar named al-Kindi learned to listen. A true polymath, he wrote on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics, but his most enduring contribution to the science of secrecy was a manuscript with a disarmingly direct title, a manuscript on deciphering cryptographic messages. Within its pages, al-Kindi did something no one before him had ever formally documented. He laid out, step by step, a methodical procedure for cracking the monoalphabetic substitution cipher, the very kind used for centuries from Rome to Constantinople. His weapon was not magic but mathematics and observation. He called it frequency analysis. Al-Kindi's brilliant insight was this: in any given language, letters are not used equally. Some appear constantly, others only rarely. In Arabic, he noted, the letter Aleph is by far the most common. If you intercept a long message encoded with a simple substitution cipher, where one letter always stands for another, then the most frequent symbol in that coded text is statistically likely to represent the most common letter in the underlying language. Once you make that single connection, the entire structure of the code begins to weaken. You can then look for other patterns like common short words or frequent letter pairings. Is there a three-letter word that appears often? It might be the or, and. Is there a symbol that frequently appears doubled that could represent a common double letter? Piece by piece, using logic and linguistic statistics, the meaningless ciphertext surrenders its meaning. This was a monumental shift. Before al-Kindi, codebreaking was an art of intuition, guesswork, and luck practiced in shadows. After his manuscript, it became a demonstrable science. He transformed cryptography from a contest of wits into a measurable field of study, where a cipher's strength could be analyzed and, crucially, its weaknesses exposed. His work marked the moment the lockpick was first forged, not in a spy's workshop, but in a scholar's library, proving that the deepest secrets are often hidden not in darkness, but in plain sight, waiting for a mind sharp enough to see the patterns everyone else overlooks. Al-Kindi's frequency analysis could crack any monoalphabetic cipher, but what if the text you were trying to read was written in a script that had never been seen anywhere else in the world? This is the enduring mystery of the Voynich manuscript, a book that stands as perhaps the most famous cryptographic puzzle in history. Discovered in the early 20th century, this 240-page codex is written entirely in an unknown script, flowing from left to right in a neat, elegant hand. Its pages are filled with bizarre, colorful illustrations, strange plants that do not match any known botany, intricate astrological diagrams featuring unfamiliar constellations, and drawings of small, nude female figures bathing in or connected to a system of green, interlocking pipes. The text itself shows statistical patterns similar to a real language, with word lengths and character repetitions that feel organized and intentional, not random gibberish. Yet for over a century, the world's top cryptographers, linguists, and historians have failed to decipher a single word. The leading theory is that it represents a complex cipher, possibly created in the early 15th century, designed to protect extraordinary secrets. Some believe it is an encoded herbal or alchemical manual, its strange plants representing lost knowledge of medicinal or transformative properties. Others suggest it could contain state secrets or heretical religious knowledge, hidden behind a layer of beautiful but impenetrable code. What makes the Voynich manuscript so captivating is not just its age or its odd pictures, but what it represents, the absolute limit of our understanding. Here is a message that has survived for centuries, a deliberate communication from the past, and we hold it in our hands completely blind to its meaning. It is the ultimate test of the principles we have explored, a lock for which the key has been utterly lost. This manuscript reminds us that for all our advances, from the Scytale to frequency analysis, some secrets from the ancient and early modern world were crafted with such ingenuity that they continue to guard their silence, a powerful testament to the human capacity to hide a thought so completely that it becomes a ghost, whispering just beyond the edge of comprehension. The very substance on which a secret was written shaped its destiny. A message carved into stone carries a different kind of silence than one whispered onto wax, and ancient cryptographers understood this intimately. Their choice of medium was the first, and often most critical, layer of their craft. Consider the papyrus scroll, the paper of the ancient Mediterranean. Made from the pith of the reedy papyrus plant, it was lightweight, flexible, and could be produced in long rolls perfect for lengthy dispatches. But it was fragile, susceptible to moisture, fire, and the simple wear of time. A cryptographic system relying on papyrus accepted a fundamental trade-off. The message could travel far and be read quickly, but its existence was temporary. Countless encoded orders from Egyptian pharaohs or Roman governors have vanished because the papyrus they were written on crumbled to dust in a damp cellar or was consumed in the sacking of a city. The medium itself imposed a deadline on the secret. For more immediate, reusable communication, the wax tablet reigned supreme. This was the ancient world's notebook and secure messaging device combined. A wooden frame held a recess filled with beeswax, tinted often with a dark pigment. A stylus, sharp on one end for writing and flat on the other for smoothing, was used to inscribe letters into the wax's surface. Its genius was its impermanence. The wax could be warmed and smoothed over, erasing the old message entirely to make way for the new. This erasable nature made it the perfect medium for the steganographic tricks described by Aeneas Tacticus, where a message could be hidden in the wood beneath a fresh layer of wax. The wax tablet embraced ephemeral secrecy. It was for conversations meant to be held and then disappear, leaving no physical evidence behind. In stark contrast stood clay, the writing surface of Mesopotamia and beyond. Here a scribe would take a damp, malleable lump of clay, form it into a tablet, and press wedge-shaped cuneiform signs into it with a reed stylus. The tablet was then left to dry in the sun or baked in a kiln, turning it into a permanent, almost indestructible record. A cryptographic message pressed into clay was a secret meant to last. The very act demanded forethought and ceremony. This was not a note to be discarded. The durability of clay is why we have any evidence of early cryptographic attempts at all. Those obscure logograms and strange syllabic substitutions from 4,000 years ago survived because the medium itself was a fortress against time. When a Mesopotamian priest encoded a ritual formula in clay, he was not just hiding it from the uninitiated of his own era, he was preserving its hidden meaning for eternity, perhaps believing that the gods themselves would read it long after his civilization had turned to dust. Then there was leather and its refined cousin, parchment, made from treated animal skins. These materials were tough, flexible, and far more durable than papyrus. The Spartan Scytale relied on a strip of leather because it needed to be wound tightly, written on, unwound, and then survive a runner's journey through rough terrain without tearing. Parchment, developed later, became the premium medium for important documents in the Byzantine and medieval worlds. A complex cipher like Leo the mathematician's would likely have been inscribed on a sheet of fine parchment, a signal that the message within was of the highest importance, worthy of a material that could last for centuries. The medium sent a silent message before a single coded letter was read. A wax tablet whispered of temporary plans, a clay tablet spoke of eternal rights, and a parchment scroll declared matters of enduring state. The physicality of the secret, its texture and weight, was inseparable from the intellectual act of concealing it. In the end, the story of ancient cryptography is written not just in clever ideas, but in the very fibers of reeds, the smoothness of wax, and the enduring hardness of baked earth. The most sophisticated cipher could be rendered useless by a single, well-placed lie. Beyond the rods and the rotated alphabets, ancient states mastered a darker, more fluid art of secrecy, one that targeted not the message but the mind of the enemy. This was psychological cryptography, a system built on deception and misinformation, where the goal was not merely to hide the truth, but to actively replace it with a carefully crafted falsehood. The security of a genuine secret was often best ensured by drowning it in a sea of plausible lies. One of the most potent tools in this arsenal was the planted document. Imagine a Roman intelligence officer aware that his camp has been infiltrated by Gallic spies. Instead of tightening security alone, he might orchestrate an elaborate performance. A trusted centurion is seen being harshly reprimanded in public for losing a wax tablet. Later, a scout finds that very tablet discarded near a riverbank. When the Gallic spies inevitably retrieve it, they discover what appears to be a high-level strategic dispatch, encoded with a substitution cipher they have partially broken. With great effort, they decipher it to reveal plans for a major legionary movement through a northern valley. They rush this priceless intelligence to their chieftain, who mobilizes his warriors to prepare an ambush at that very location. But the valley is empty. While the Gallic force is concentrated there, the real Roman legions strike from an entirely different, undefended direction. The planted tablet did not contain a secret, it contained a weapon. Its cipher was not meant to be unbreakable, but breakable just enough to be believed. This practice turned the enemy's own code-breaking efforts against them, exploiting their hunger for intelligence and their trust in the very cryptographic systems they sought to defeat. The false document was a Trojan horse made of words, and its payload was a catastrophic misdirection. Alongside forged papers, the ancient world utilized the ultimate human vector for misinformation, the double agent. A well-placed turncoat was worth 1,000 cipher keys. A Hittite king, suspecting a neighboring kingdom was deciphering his diplomatic correspondence, might identify a minor official within his own court who was known to be disgruntled or vulnerable to bribery. Instead of arresting him, the king's spymasters would carefully feed him a stream of compelling, yet entirely fabricated, state secrets. This official, now a double agent, would believe he was selling genuine intelligence to the enemy, who would pay handsomely for it. The adversary, receiving this information from a source they trusted implicitly, would base their military and diplomatic decisions on a foundation of fiction. The true plans, communicated through a separate, ultra-secure channel known only to a tiny circle, would proceed unseen. This human layer of cryptography was devastatingly effective because it bypassed the mechanical puzzle entirely. No frequency analysis could detect the falsehood, no captured Scytale could reveal the deception. It corrupted the very source of the enemy's knowledge, making them complicit in their own downfall. These strategies reveal a profound understanding that information security is a holistic endeavor. The lock on the scroll is only one part of the defense. A state's true secrets were protected by a layered system, a pyramid of deception. At the base were the technical ciphers, the Scytales and shift codes, which provided a basic barrier. Above that were the physical protections, the trusted couriers and the unbroken seals. And at the pinnacle was the psychological layer, the realm of feints and falsehoods, designed to misdirect attention and poison the well of enemy intelligence. This triad created a formidable defense in depth. An adversary might pierce one layer only to be ensnared by the next. They could break a code only to find it led them into a trap. They could intercept a messenger only to discover he was carrying a lie meant to be intercepted. In this light, the ancient spymaster was the ultimate cryptographer, not of letters, but of reality itself, weaving narratives where truth was the most closely guarded secret of all. The line between a state secret and a sacred incantation was often invisible. In the minds of Egyptian priests and Mesopotamian scribes, the act of encoding was not merely administrative, it was a ritual of protection. They believed that certain words, especially the true names of gods or the precise formulas for ceremonies, held inherent power. To write such a thing plainly was to risk unleashing that power uncontrollably, or worse, allowing it to be captured and misused by those not spiritually prepared. So they turned the tools of cryptography toward a new purpose, guarding the mystical from the profane. This was secrecy as a sacred duty. In Egypt, we saw this with the cryptographic hieroglyphs that disguised divine names, transforming them into puzzles to be solved only by the initiated priesthood. The goal was not to prevent a rival king from reading a battle plan, but to prevent cosmic chaos from seeping into the ordered world. A misspoken or carelessly written divine name in a funerary text could jeopardize the pharaoh's entire journey through the afterlife. The cipher here acted as a spiritual filter, ensuring that only those with the proper knowledge and purity could access and correctly vocalize the potent words. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, the obscure logograms chosen for temple rituals or medical incantations created a professional barrier. A recipe for a healing salve might be encoded not to protect intellectual property in a modern sense, but because the preparation was considered a holy act, intertwined with prayers and specific ceremonial actions known only to the ashapu, the exorcist priest. To give that knowledge to someone untrained was not just risky, it was sacrilegious. They might prepare the physical ingredients correctly, but without the accompanying sacred words and gestures, the remedy would be inert or even dangerous. This practice reveals a fascinating layer of the ancient worldview. Knowledge itself was seen as a kind of current, powerful and potentially volatile. Secrecy was the insulation around that current. By encoding their most potent texts, these cultures were doing more than hiding information. They were managing a spiritual force. The cryptographic technique became a form of ritual precision, a way to handle the divine with the care it demanded. This transforms our understanding of these early systems. They were not just the precursors to modern espionage, they were also the precursors to concepts of classified information and restricted access, rooted in a belief that some truths are too powerful for general consumption. The locked box of words protected not just a political advantage, but the very balance between the human realm and the realm of the gods. In this light, the scribe etching strange symbols into a clay tablet was performing an act of both scholarship and sanctity, weaving a protective spell out of language itself. Across the ancient world, the same fundamental puzzle inspired radically different solutions. The drive to conceal meaning was universal, yet the context and purpose of that secrecy shaped its form. In the Mediterranean, the cryptographic impulse was forged in the crucible of war and politics. From the Spartan Scytale to the Roman military's complex layers of signals and shorthand, the focus was overwhelmingly pragmatic, a tool for battlefield advantage and state survival. Their innovations, like the Polybius Square, were often born from immediate logistical needs, such as signaling across a battlefield. The goal was operational security, protecting the literal movement of armies and the words of emperors from enemy eyes. This tradition viewed secrecy as a shield, a necessary component of power in a landscape of rival city-states and expanding empires. It was a public secret, in a sense, where the very existence of a coded message declared its importance and restricted its audience to a military or political elite. Meanwhile, far to the east, the same principles of substitution and concealment were being explored within very different cultural frameworks. In ancient India, as the Kamasutra illustrates, secret writing was formalized as one of the 64 arts, a skill for the cultivated person. Here, cryptography, or mlecchita-vikalpa, was integrated into the fabric of social and personal life. It was a tool for lovers to exchange private sentiments, for merchants to secure commercial dealings, and for poets to add layers of cleverness to their work. The context was intimate and artistic, a means of navigating the complex webs of personal desire and social diplomacy. Secrecy was not just for matters of life and death, but for matters of the heart and the marketplace, reflecting a society that valued discretion as a facet of sophistication and personal agency. In China, the philosophical foundation was laid by strategic thinkers like Sun Tzu, who declared all warfare to be based on deception. This elevated secrecy from a mere tactic to a core principle of statecraft and cosmic order. The Chinese approach was deeply philosophical and strategic, viewing the control of information as essential to maintaining harmony and exerting power. While specific early Chinese ciphers are less documented than their Roman counterparts, the intellectual environment was rich with the concept. The focus was on the grand illusion, the art of making the enemy see what you wished them to see, which necessitated perfect internal secrecy. This created a culture where cryptographic thinking was embedded in military doctrine and possibly in the administration of a vast, centralized bureaucracy. The goal was not just to protect a message but to manage perception itself, so we see a fascinating divergence. In the West, cryptography often took physical form: a rod, a wax tablet, a set of torch signals responding to concrete threats. In the East, particularly in India and China, it was more often an intellectual or social practice, woven into philosophy, art, and the theory of power. The similarity lies in the brilliant use of substitution, the shared human understanding that to protect a thought, you must change its appearance. The difference lies in what that thought was meant to protect: an empire's border, a lover's promise, or a commander's strategic illusion. Each tradition, in its own way, recognized that the most powerful truths are often those that remain just out of sight, accessible only to those who know the rules of the hidden game. The principles they discovered were not lost, only waiting. Centuries after the libraries of Constantinople were filled with Leo's cipher alphabets, and long after al-Kindi's manuscript was copied by Arab scholars, the intellectual torch passed to a new generation in Renaissance Europe. Here, in the courts of rival Italian city-states and the Vatican, secrecy became a high art once more. Cryptographers like Leon Battista Alberti and Giovanni Porta did not start from scratch. They were rediscovering and crucially refining principles that were ancient by their time. The direct line of inheritance is unmistakable. The Polybius Square, that simple 5x5 grid invented for Greek torch signals, re-emerged as the foundational structure for more complex Renaissance cipher disks and tables. Alberti's famous cipher disk, often hailed as a revolutionary invention in the 15th century, operated on a principle of rotating alphabets, a dramatic advancement. Yet its core mechanic, the alignment of one alphabet against another to create a substitution key, was a sophisticated evolution of the same basic idea that governed the Caesar cipher. Caesar shifted the entire alphabet by a fixed number. Alberti's disk allowed that shift to change with every few words, but the ancestral DNA of monoalphabetic substitution was still there, being improved upon. Even more telling is the fate of al-Kindi's breakthrough. His treatise on frequency analysis, written in the 9th century, traveled through the Islamic world and into Spain. By the Renaissance, European cryptanalysts were employing the exact same statistical method to crack the diplomatic codes of their rivals. What was a revolutionary discovery in Baghdad became standard operating procedure in the cipher chambers of Paris and Rome. The ancient weakness of language, its predictable heartbeat, was now a formal tool for unraveling secrets. This was not a case of independent invention, but of recovered knowledge. The Renaissance cryptographers stood on the shoulders of Roman emperors, Greek historians, and Arab mathematicians, even if they did not always know their names. They were perfecting an ancient craft, adding layers of complexity like polyalphabetic ciphers that used multiple substitution alphabets in sequence to finally defeat frequency analysis, a problem al-Kindi himself had exposed. So when we look at a complex Renaissance codebook with its tables of homophones and nulls, we are not seeing something entirely new. We are seeing the mature flowering of a seed planted millennia earlier, when a Spartan king first wound leather around a rod and a Roman emperor decided that it should secretly become D. The legacy of these ancient systems is not merely historical curiosity. It is the very foundation upon which all later secrecy was built, a testament to the fact that the most enduring human problems inspire solutions that echo across the ages. The true measure of a cipher lies in the threats it was built to face. We must judge these ancient systems not by the supercomputers of our era, but by the world they inhabited, where a secret's lifespan was often measured in the time it took a runner to cross a mountain range. Their security was not absolute, but it was brilliantly sufficient. A message from a Roman general to his legate, encrypted with a simple shift cipher, did not need to remain unbreakable for centuries. It only needed to defy comprehension for the handful of days it spent in a courier's pouch, traveling from one fortified camp to another. The adversary was not a room of analysts with statistical software, but perhaps a lone Gallic scout who, even if he intercepted the scroll, was likely illiterate in Latin, let alone versed in the principles of letter frequency. The primary defense was not mathematical complexity, but a layered reality of distance, time, and cultural separation. The cipher was the final lock on a door that was already guarded by 100 miles of treacherous wilderness. This leads us to a principle modern computer scientists often warn against, but one that was the bedrock of ancient cryptography: security through obscurity. For a Spartan king, the entire security of the Scytale rested on the enemy not knowing the method existed. If an Athenian agent had never seen or heard of a coded leather strip, he would have no reason to suspect the innocuous scrap of hide he found on a captured runner was anything but a blank strap. The system's strength was in its novelty and secrecy. The same was true for the hidden messages beneath wax tablets. The method described by Aeneas Tacticus was effective precisely because it was not common knowledge, because an inspector would see only a mundane business contract on the surface, not imagining a second text etched into the wood below. The obscurity of the technique itself was the primary barrier. There were no published papers on cryptanalysis, no shared body of knowledge among rival states about how to systematically attack these codes. Each civilization guarded its cryptographic methods as closely as the messages they carried, treating the design of the lock as a state secret equal to the contents it protected. This creates a fascinating paradox. From our modern vantage point, we can see the inherent weaknesses in these systems. We know that frequency analysis can dismantle a monoalphabetic cipher, that a determined observer could deduce the diameter of a Scytale from enough intercepted leather strips. But the ancient cryptographers were not designing for a world where their methods would be widely known and studied. They were designing for a moment. The threat model was immediate and practical, not theoretical. Could a rival decipher this specific message before the military maneuver it ordered was executed? Could a spy understand this document before the diplomatic window closed? Often, the answer was no, not because the cipher was unbreakable in principle, but because the clock ran out first. The security was temporal, baked into the very pace of ancient life, where communication moved at the speed of a horse or a ship. By the time an enemy even realized they were looking at a code, and not just foreign gibberish, the secret had often already served its purpose. The troops had moved, the alliance was sealed. In this light, these systems were not weak, they were perfectly calibrated to their environment. They solved the problem they were given with elegant, often minimalist efficiency. Their legacy is a reminder that security is never an abstract ideal, but a practical response to a specific set of dangers, a race against the limited time and tools of an adversary. These scattered innovations across time and space reveal a unified truth. Ancient cryptography was not a single, linear invention, but a diverse and sophisticated field of human ingenuity, flowering independently wherever power needed a whisper. From the physical mechanics of the Spartan Scytale to the mathematical elegance of al-Kindi's analysis, each system was a tailored response to the same eternal challenge: how to protect the words upon which states and civilizations depended. They were far from primitive curiosities. They were highly effective tools, precisely calibrated to the threats and technologies of their age. The security of a Roman shift cipher was measured in the days it took a Gallic scout to even realize he was holding a code, not in centuries of mathematical scrutiny. These locks for language worked. They shielded the mobilization orders that decided the fate of battles, and encrypted the diplomatic proposals that redrew the maps of the ancient world. They were the silent architects of history, protecting the fragile threads of command and negotiation that held empires together. This enduring drive to conceal and reveal, to create a language within a language, speaks to something fundamental in the human story. It is the acknowledgement that some information is too potent, too dangerous, or too sacred to be left in the open. We have always built rooms with no doors for our most important thoughts. Today, we live in an age of digital encryption, of algorithms so complex they underpin our entire global economy and communications. Yet the core struggle remains identical, a race between those who devise locks and those who seek to pick them. It invites a final, reflective question. Centuries from now, when scholars look back at our era, what will they make of our own cryptographic secrets? Which of our digital whispers, our encoded financial transactions, or our sealed diplomatic cables will become the next great mystery, a puzzle fragment from a lost world waiting for a future mind to find the key?